and welcome to my story. On the 10th of October 1918, just before 10 a.m., the RMS Leinster was sailing east from the Kish Bank, approximately 7 miles off the coast of Dublin, and bound for Holyhead in a heavy swell. Passengers saw a torpedo approach from the port side and pass in front of the bow. A second torpedo followed shortly afterwards from the German submarine UB-123 and struck the ship forward on the port side in the vicinity of the mailroom. The ship made a U-turn in an attempt to return to Kingstown, the former name for what is now called Dunleary. At this point, it began to settle slowly by the bow, but sank rapidly after a third torpedo struck her, causing a huge explosion. The ship's log states that she carried 77 crew and 694 passengers on her final voyage. Those on board included more than 100 British civilians, 22 postal sorters working in the mailroom, and almost 500 military personnel from the Royal Navy, British Army, and Royal Air Force. Also on board were nurses from the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States. The most up-to-date research shows that 564 people died, 239 survived aboard lifeboats, clinging to life rafts and in the sea. Several of the military personnel who died are buried in Grangegorman Military Cemetery. One of them is buried at Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery here in Limerick. He was military passenger 81797, Private James Honan, of the Royal Defence Corps 3000 Protection Company, formerly the Royal Munster Fusiliers. He was my great-grandfather. On my story today is Tipperary military historian Tom Burnell, who runs the Ireland's Great War Dead.ie, a digitisation of his 15-volume series published in 2017, documenting the 26 county casualties of the Great War, which listed 29,450 people who died. I'd like you to welcome Tom to the show today. Hello, Tom. How are you?
God bless all here. And remember, Queen Nima Seed, we will remember him.
Absolutely, Tom. Can you tell me, before we start, what is it about the poppy that evokes such binary views, such diametrically opposed views of what constitutes a hero and what constitutes somebody who died for the freedom that we enjoy enough to say what we want to say about people who took that decision? Why is the poppy such a problem for some people?
Well, I can only speak for myself. I don't have a problem with the poppy. I think it's a lovely symbol, and it represents such an awful lot. When I started this database, I never really started out to do the 26 counties. If you go back to the beginning, when I was a child, we used to have the rosary around the fire, and I was born in Kew Road in Finglas. And my father was a very religious man, and while we'd be saying the rosary, at the end of it, he'd always say, right, we're going to have 3 Hail Marys for your own special intentions. And I might have been only 6 or 7, but I always said the same thing, and it was, we'd have 3 Hail Marys for the soldiers who died on the battlefield without the benefit of a priest. Where that came from, I don't know, and I said it several times, and he always said the 3 Hail Marys for us. So eventually, like, I moved to Tipperary in the year 2000 because I had a connection with the War Museum in St. Mary's Family War Museum in Torres.
Okay.
And in 1996, 97, we had a military affair in the Honor Hotel in Torres. And attending there was a fighting 69th US reenactors from the American Civil War, all Irish fellows, of course. And among them was a fellow called Austin Fennessy, who donated a copy of Soldiers Died in the Great War CD-ROM, which was published by Naval and Military Press. Now, that was a fabulous database, and it's a skeleton of anything that you're going to do regarding county casualties. So I left that, it was left on the shelf in the museum for a year or two. And then I was asked to write an article for a few of the local graves here in Holy Cross, and for the Holy Cross fellows who died during the war.
Yeah.
So I used this as the basis of it. And around that time, around the year 2000, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission came online and allowed free access to their database, which means that you could find a soldier's rank, name, unit, his next of kin, and where he was buried. So when you put them together, you got a good shot at covering most of the bases. But then the records came online with Ancestry and Find My Past. And even today, they're still coming on with new databases. Like within the last couple of years, there was Register of Soldiers Effects, Irish Soldiers' Wills, and Folder 3. Folder 3 is the latest one to come out. And it's all of the pension documents for soldiers who died. Now, naturally enough, the hardest of all the armies to research was the Americans. Now, the Americans
would have thought that would have been pretty. You would have thought that would have been pretty organized.
Well, you see, all the states are separate, and most of the records was burnt in a fire, like the ones in the Public Record Office in Kew. Yeah. And then again, the databases are still coming online. There's unit histories, and they have every state recorded or awarded with their service numbers, which was fantastic. And then the latest database, which came out in the last year, is called Zooniverse, Zooniverse. And these were hidden for 100 years, and these are the death cards. These are the cards that follow the body. When the soldier died, he gave his name, his rank, his unit, what he died from, where he was buried, when he was disinterred and reburied again, who was informed about it.
So organized, so meticulous.
Oh, fantastic. And it also said, told you when the body was being returned to the relatives, because you could request the body and the body would be sent home to you. Now, there were 3 ships that brought the bodies home to Ireland. One was the steamship, the Orlock Head, and the other was the steamship, Millwater. Millwater brought the most. I think there was about 70 bodies in that. And there's another ship, I think it was called the Wheaton, but it was never actually recorded. But they came in around 1922, 23. And there's about 200 American casualties of World War I who are buried in Ireland here. So that was it.
You know what? I was struck by the amount of people at the outbreak of World War I, 1914. There was 30,000 Irish fighting, according to my research. There was 30,000 Irish that were listed as, in August 1914, there was around 30,000 Irish serving in the British Army.
Oh, you mean, yeah, they were the old sweats, I can't think of the name of them now, but they were already in the army, or they were already on reserve. I remember at that time, if you go back to the villages as they were before the rebellion, you could see that there was soldiers there, old soldiers from the Crimea, and there was soldiers there from the Indian Wars and from the Boer Wars, and they were walking around the place. Now, this is before 1916. They were walking around the place, and they were men of stature. People respected them and looked up to them and tried to be like them, you know what I mean? So then when we're going to leave 1916 and the rebellion out of this, because it has no part of it. No. There's people who want to join it together and start bringing up the old spite that's there and all that negativity. This is not part of it. Don't just remember the guys who died.
It hasn't seemed to leave, Tom, because again, when I go back to the poppy, there's always people who'll say, oh, that's a symbol of repression and a symbol of our 800 years of oppression under British rule, and why should we support? Well, my grandfather was a Limerick, great-grandfather was a Limerick man. Okay, I was English born and my father was English, and my great-grandfather was living in the UK at the time that he died on the Leinster, and people made choices. They fought in wars, they joined armies because for financial reasons and everything. Maybe they weren't as politically motivated against their fellow men as others might have been. But I just get so quite perturbed when I hear people saying, oh, that poppy is a symbol. That poppy to me is a symbol of people going out and fighting for freedom for humankind. That's what it symbolizes to me.
Gayborn had it right when he said that there's always people out there just waiting to be offended by something. You know what I mean?
They're permanently offended.
And everybody has an opinion.
Yeah.
I have an opinion on very little. But around World War I time, there was a very popular thing for priests and journalists and politicians to go out to the front, and councillors to go out to the front. And of course, they would have access to the officers of the upper echelons of society, and they would have permission to go out there and to be driven around the front lines. And their purpose for being there was to talk to the local soldiers, so that when they went home, they could put an article into the paper saying, "I was talking to Peter from Mullinahone, and I was over there with Pat Maloney from Torres and Roscrea, you know." And then they would tell them, the lads at the front would tell them stories of what they were doing and why they were there and who died yesterday, and he was there when it happened and he was well looked after and all this sort of thing. But there was an article in the Echo, which was a gory newspaper, saying that this particular journalist went out to the front and he was talking to Johnny. Now, I don't know whether Johnny is his real name, but that's the name they used. And he said, "Well, Johnny," he says, "how are you getting on here?" He said, "That's fantastic." He says, "Anything that's happening in the world is happening here right now, and I'm part of it. There are 10 million here behind me, and we're all heading in the same direction. It's going to be over by Christmas, you know. We're going to win." But he says, you come from a rural place in Wexford. He says, "Yes," he said, "but I don't have to pay for my uniforms. I get me grub here. All my mates are here," which was the big thing in them days. All my mates are here.
That was huge.
He says, "The wife gets 10 bob a week separation money. I get 2 and 6 each for the kids. If I get a wound, I get a pension. If I get killed, she gets a pension. And the kids get a pension as well." But he said, you come from a quiet rural place in County Wexford, in Gorey, and you worked on a farm. And he says, it's quiet and peaceful. He says, "Do you not miss it?" He said, "I worked for a Wexford farmer," he said, "for the last 20 years. And he said, not once in that time did he ever say to me, 'Stand easy. Stand easy.'"
Isn't that amazing?
It's an army saying for a lot.
Stand easy or at your ease.
And the beautiful thing about it was, attached to every barracks in the country, there were women volunteers, and their job was to let out the uniforms as the old soldiers grew into them, because they were being better fed, they were medically being looked after. Even when I joined the army, they gave me a uniform, and all the rest of the platoon. They gave me a uniform that didn't fit me. It was too big. Now, I was 19 at the time. And the thing was, they were right. I wasn't right because the uniform didn't fit me. They were right to give me a uniform that was bigger, because they actually grew into it. Mostly when they leave the army, will fit into the uniform they got at the start, you know?
Yeah, you looked at a ragtag group of misfortunes in oversized clothes until you actually, and that actually, in a sense, had a powerful effect on people, because when they saw themselves growing into their uniforms, it gave them that sense of, well, one, comradeship, because they were all in this with a shared sense of duty. But two, it made you feel like a sense of power as well, when you suddenly start to get bigger and start fitting your uniform.
And you're more fit and healthy and be looked after medically, and a few bob in your pocket.
And a few bob in your pocket. And that's the power of my research was on World War II and on childhood under Nazism. And the power of the uniform can never be overstated. Putting youngsters who had nothing and went into the army, and suddenly they had money, they had respect, they had fear, which was probably in a lot of cases, the uniform instilled a sense of fear in people when people saw them certainly with the SS uniform. People saw them in the SS uniform. They didn't see them no longer as poor people or uneducated. They saw them as something to fear, not necessarily to admire, but to fear. And fear can be an aphrodisiac. to many who joined the army. But in World War I, I would imagine that the majority of it was just to live and to survive and to earn money. And as you say, to send money back to your family. And if in the event the worst happens and you die, your family is looked after.
It was a different time in that when they left civilian life and they went over to the battlefields, they were surrounded by their friends. And a lot of them, when they were wounded, would go to hospitals and would ask to be released from hospitals to go back to the front to fight with their friends. And when the war was over and they came out, they related to each other with a stronger bond than brothers would have, because they'd been through something awful. And
brothers in arms.
They could discuss it in the way that they could understand. They couldn't explain to you. You'd probably hear the old story of the old soldier would never talk about the war. How could he explain to a civilian the horror he went through, you know?
It's brothers in arms. It's kind of like that series, Band of Brothers. I suppose that's really is. I mean, when people have been through hell and back, how can you describe hell to somebody who hasn't been there?
You just can't. Even us just describing it. The newspapers are great for that, and I'm very aware of the Widow's Penny, the book by, is it Kavanagh, of the Limerick men who were killed.
Patrick Kavanagh, The Widow's Penny.
Yeah, okay, did that plan? But it means the same thing. But the death plaque itself, it's I think I have a few here in the drawer. Can't be that far away.
It's Pat Dargan wrote The Widow's Penny. Oh, isn't that fabulous?
Okay, now there's 1,355,000 of them made, and only 600 of them are to women. Now, if you look here at the start, you see he died for freedom and honor. See the he, H-E?
He died, yeah.
Yeah. See the H is wide?
Yeah.
It's a wide H, which means that they can take that H out of the type and put in SH. She died for freedom and honor. And there were only 600 women killed in World War I. And if you ever see a narrow H here, it means he was a Navy man, because there's no she's in the Navy. So there you go.
That's fascinating.
That's 5.5 inches wide, or 5.25 inches wide. You never seen one of them before?
Never saw one of those before. And you know, I always say that every time I think that anyone that survived or anyone who's buried here in Ireland, I've never been notified about any events that were commemorating the. I mean, in 1991, the anchor of the RMS was raised, and it was placed near Carlisle Pier and officially dedicated on the 28th of January 96. In October 2018, the Minister for Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, Josepha Madigan, confirmed that the Leinster is now under the protection of the National Monuments Act, which covers all shipwrecks over 100 years old. But they've had several events, and there's events regularly on for the war dead in 1918. And I never I don't think any of my family have ever been notified about it, you know, and you think that probably in St. Lawrence Cemetery, James Honan is probably certainly the only member of the British Defence Forces to die on the Leinster. Do you know? And it's I don't know if there's anybody else there. I haven't seen anybody else buried. I know that there are British military graves dotted around St. Lawrence Cemetery. But I think that from what I know, James Honan is listed as the only one from the Leinster to be buried in Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery. The rest are in Dublin.
Well, you see, you might have to revisit that, because Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery in Limerick.
I can see it from my house, from my bedroom, because my parents are buried with him.
I understand.
And we had to actually apply to the British Army at the time for permission to bury my dad there, and within a couple of months, my mum. And so I know that when I researched it, it said that according to the research, it said that that there's only one was listed as being buried in Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery.
Right. When I did the 26, okay, when I did the 26 county casualties of the Great War in the 15 volumes, I said it would only be right to finish it like the Apocrypha, the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation. And I said, in order to do it right, I have to put in those that are left out, those that are almost qualified to be included in the Combat War Graves Commission. So I'm a member of the In From the Cold Project. And in order to be accepted by the In From the Cold Project, you have to die from the effects of war. You have to die from what you were discharged with from the army. And what you were discharged from the army, you had to have got it during your service, or your service made it aggravated, right? So, and I have to say that in the records. So that's very difficult. And sometimes, like, you would find a fella who's discharged with bronchitis, but he dies from phthisis. Phthisis was the old name for TB.
Yeah, TB.
And the only time I've ever heard phthisis, PHTHISIS, the only time I've ever heard that word being used on the television was in Peaky Blinders, believe it or not. Peaky Blinders.
Watched it. Never watched Peaky Blinders. No. Yeah. But you know, what did the majority of the Irish do in, were they military, would they have been considered military personnel, or would they have worked in, say, like when my dad did his national service in the UK, he did a lot, he worked with the Royal Army Medical Corps, and my Uncle Stan trained as a baker with it. Now, did the Irish see battles? Quite a lot. I know that there was the Battle of Gallipoli, and I know that 4,000 Irish soldiers died out of a total of 15,000 who served during the campaign. Would they have seen battle? Would they have died in the field of battle?
Gallipoli was it was one of the bloodiest battles of the war.
Yeah.
Besides Passchendaele. But I mean, the lads were out at sea for 2 weeks, and then as they approached the shore, there was underwater barbed wire, and they had to cut a side of the ship, and the soldiers came out of the side of the ship into barges and launches, and they had to make their way to the shore, and the machine guns were trained on them. Even though the naval artillery were firing on Gallipoli and all around Gallipoli, it was a bloodbath. Dublin Fusiliers was there, of course, naturally enough. But as I was saying, sorry, not bringing it back to this other point I was making about the In From the Cold Project, they would be included, those who didn't qualify for inclusion in the Common War Graves Commission, or who have been refused by the In From the Cold Project, they're included in the database. And also people who wouldn't qualify, like munition workers, the merchant navy who were sunk by submarines, but they weren't on war work, so they wouldn't be commemorated. You would have coast watchers, you would have barrack staff, barrack sergeants, recruiting sergeants, civilian drivers for the army pay clerks. They just wouldn't be remembered. So, and I also said, in fairness, the only way to do it right was to include every soldier who had World War I service, who died from the 6th of August 1914 to the 31st of August 1921, which is the dates used by the Common War Graves Commission, to include them no matter what they died from, and they're all in the database, and it's free to use. So
I mean, from what I know of our situation, I think my grandfather was 2 years old when, from what I was told, we don't really know a whole lot about it, but that James Honan was on board, or he was to travel on the Munster, and he brought a passenger off who was a prisoner, and he brought him for a drink, is what we heard, and he missed the Munster, got on the Leinster, and of course there were several attempts at torpedoing the Leinster, and the final one was successful, if you like, for want of a better word, as they were trying to, as I said in the introduction, as they were trying to head back to Dún Laoghaire. It just toppled over and sank immediately. And, you know, it's just tragic, you know, and you wonder what, you know, I've researched the worst of humankind in my research, and you just wonder, what was it all for? You know, I know people fought and they died for the greater good, as they saw, or for the glory, or for finances, or what. But what is a war all for? You know?
I'll tell you what it was for. If it wasn't for those lads going out in World War One, we'd be all speaking German now.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And but you know, it became the precursor, I suppose, if you like, for Germany during, because they lost so heavily in World War One, and they were made to pay reparations to Britain and to France and to other countries, and it was the bitterness that was there that actually became the catalyst that started World War II. So in many respects, you cannot see World War II without looking at World War I. Do you know? Because had World War I not happened, probably, who knows whether World War II might have happened at all, do you know?
I understand.
You know, but how many people, are there many people still missing in action, if you like, bodies that were never found? Did you look at that? Because according to my records, there's 4 million American military personnel served, and 110,000 of them never returned. 4,400 are still listed as missing in action. That's a lot of people whose
what happened is, but when a unit went into battle, if they were wiped out or they were machine gunned in no man's land and they weren't buried, they would just be obliterated with the soil. Or if they were buried and they made a reference, maybe put a marker on where all the lads were buried, they would come back them and they would rebury them. But the Americans were different. They buried, if the fella died in the field, they bury him on the spot, and they come back to him. It might be a year or two later, but they come back and they dig him up. They put him in a cemetery, then they might dig him up again.
Yeah.
And there's a very famous video on, I think it's on YouTube, and it shows the Americans disinterring the bodies, wrapping them up in cloth, and putting them into coffins to be brought home to America. There you go. The Americans are great.
Do you know what I found interesting? I read an article on that was out on the 15th of March 2021, that 270 German soldiers had been buried in a tunnel in Winterberg tunnel, and their bodies were finally found, and they were lost deep within the still battle-scarred French landscape, but they were recently found. Do you know anything? Did you hear anything?
That's amazing. Yes, I do know that the German government paid the French government for the graves that is in France of the Germans.
Yeah.
They've only rented the graves. There you go.
You know, it's what got you down this road? I know you say your father used to always at the rosary pray for those, and you know, it's poignant what you said about your dad talking about all those who died without a priest around them. You know, that minister, UK minister, who died there recently and who was murdered there recently, who was a devout Catholic, and the priest was not allowed in to give him the last rites. I was thinking of that, and I was thinking at the time, my God, how many people died for whom their faith was everything, And suddenly, at the very last, they were deprived not only of their lives, but a priest to actually help them to, if you like. I mean, everyone has their beliefs. Some people won't believe this or that. That's their prerogative. But for people who, like this minister, who were devoutly Catholic, for everyone of every faith who has a last request or who has I suppose a spiritual process that they go through at the end of their lives, to be deprived of that at the last minute just seems unconscionable.
Well, this is it. Harry Patch, I'm sure you heard of Harry Patch. He was the last survivor of World War One, and he was a pacifist, a lovely, lovely man. And he was saying that there are no atheists in the trenches.
No, there's no atheists in foxholes, they say.
That's the words I was looking for.
And no atheists in foxholes. Now, I've said that to so many people, and they've said to me, absolutely, I don't agree with that and all this. But it's not, I suppose, until we're in foxholes that we start, or that we're at our lowest, that we start looking to somebody for. And it's amazing. I interviewed so many and still continue to interview so many survivors and children of survivors of all genocides, really, but mainly the Shoah. And all of them, bar none, even those that were considered themselves atheists, say that the only thing that got them through was faith. Not faith in a God necessarily, but the belief that hopefully tomorrow is going to be better than today. And maybe I'll survive if I just go another day. They said that you could live without faith, you can live without God, a God, or you could live without food, but you can't live without hope.
Yeah,
it's the only thing that keeps you going. But when your father, were you always passionate about World War One? Why World War One as opposed to World War Two or the American Civil War or the 1916 Rising or whatever? Why World War Two? Why World War One?
Well, World War One, after the Rosaries business, I never thought about World War One again because we never learned about it in school. They never taught us anything about it. And it's only when I came to the Holy Cross, I started getting interested in history. And then I started just being more committed and more committed. And I could see when 2014 came along and this wasn't being addressed.
No.
Like, they were still adoring the old gods. Ireland's Memorial Records, which was fantastic, illustrated by Harry Clark in 1922. But what he did was he accepted every man in an Irish regiment in the British Army as being an Irishman.
Yeah.
Which means you can throw everything out of Ireland's out the window because it has no basis in facts. I say about 2/3 of the people in Ireland's Memorial Records have no Irish connection except they're in an Irish unit. And then he didn't do the New Zealanders, he didn't do the Australians or the South Africans, the Canadians or the Americans, the Air Force or the Navy. So I said, it just had to be done. And 2040 came along, nothing, not a peep. They were still going in, and Heather Humphreys sent a crowd of students over to Ypres to study Ireland's Memorial Records. I asked her for support. That was the last I heard of that.
Isn't it shocking when you have somebody who's going to dedicate themselves to doing things properly and they can't get support in this country from the powers that be? They always seem to want the cheap way out of everything. Get a group of students together and they can use it as part of their studies. And most students with the best will and intentions, they go out and they'll use it as maybe as a holiday or they'll do a certain amount, but they won't do it the same way as somebody who's passionate about it.
Now, I can tell you this because I know you're not going to tell anybody. And there's no one else listening, right?
There's no one listening.
I wrote a letter over to Buckingham Palace, to the Queen. And I said, look, you're coming to Cashel. I said, you're coming to Cashel. I said, try as I might, I just can't get any support over here to finish the remembering the Irish War dead. I said, these are all soldiers of your father, you know. Any chance you have an old niece? I'm only 10 minutes from Holy Cross. I'm only 10 minutes from Cashel Society. I got a lovely letter back from Buckingham Palace saying it's not the place of the British monarch to interfere in the running of a foreign state. So there you go. I was screwed again.
But you know, it was in her interests, and it was in her purview to do something, because these fought for her army, her father's army, and I suppose she should have. And that, by the same token, you know, it was good that you got an answer. Did you get an answer at all from Heather Humphreys?
No. But I wrote to the last 3 Irish presidents, and the 3 of them said, put in for a civil service job. But there's an embargo on civil service jobs. The only 2 politicians came back to me, but didn't give me any support. The rest of them ignored me. But there you go.
That's shocking. It's shocking, but they won't ignore you when they're coming around door to door looking for a vote.
Oh, I have, anytime they're looking for a vote, I have a sign on my door saying, no canvassers, no canvassers. I can't speak with a politician because I can't tell lies. I just have to tell you exactly the way things are. I can't qualify a question. I give you the answer to the question you asked me, not heading across the Serengeti with the wildebeest, you know?
You should have been invited when the Queen came to Ireland and went to Cashel. You should have, at least the Irish government should have known that there was somebody in Cashel who was doing this research and this archiving, and that you should have been invited at least by the Irish government to be there when she came to Cashel.
Yeah, sure. You can't change the beast now. But
tell me, have you ever been involved with the Tipperary Peace organization? That they're doing much the same. It's based on the idea that Tipperary was always known for it's a long way to Tipperary, and this song, and I'm sure you know all about the organization. And
Tipperary Peace Corps. Tipperary.
Pardon?
What's the name of it? The Tipperary.
The Tipperary Peace Award, and okay. every year they award somebody influential or somebody who has contributed something to society, like Malala Yousafzai for her fighting for for girls to have an education, and she was shot in the face. John Hume wasn't nominated, as far as I know. I could be wrong in there, but Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese, they got it, and people like that, and it's on every year. There
were 2 other presidents that ignored me.
Pardon?
Who were the other presidents that ignored me?
Mary McAleese and Mary Robinson.
Yeah.
Both
of them. There's no answer to that.
There's nothing I can say to that. What was I going to say? Tell me about, because I keep looking at them and just thinking, I hope there's no bullets in those behind you.
Oh, these here behind me?
Yeah.
Yeah. This one here, this is a French Fusil MLE 1886, a First World War French rifle. And that was dug from an earthen bank on the River Org at Soissons. This is a Lee Enfield 303, originally dug from the area around Tunnel Trench near Bullecourt. And this here is a 7.92 German GEW 98 Mauser, dug from the area of the German Rossignol wood trenches at Gommecourt. And
they're all circa World War One.
They're all World War One, all dug from the battlefields.
Do you know, actually, going back to I know I keep going back to the poppy. It happens to be my favorite flower. And I've been looking for a while now for a gold one. And I saw a beautiful one in the north of Ireland but it's gold plated. and it's absolutely beautiful. And I was just too late to even motivate myself to get it for this year, but I think I will for next year, given I suppose my family, connection with it. I don't know where I got the interest with World War II, other than I know my dad was in the Royal Army Medical Corps in national service, and he was born, I suppose you're talking, I think, 10 years after. No, maybe 1949. He was born in, or 19. He was born, I can't remember, I don't know what year he was born, but I think he was born just at the start. I think he was 4 years old during the war. And so I suppose it was kind of close to my family, and he lived in England, and the Blitz and everything like that, London during the Blitz, was so close to our family. And when he came home from England, he used to always watch war movies. So I probably was the boy he never had, because I'm an only child. So I was interested in anything he was interested in.
Another thing we got for the museum was, I had read an article in the newspaper in about 1993 of a sea mine being washed up on the coast. And I contacted the county council who had taken the sea mine in off the beach. And I said, any chance of it for the museum of tourists? And lo and behold, we got a truck and we collected the sea mine, we brought it down to tourists. The sea mine. Fantastic. It was brilliant.
Yeah. And but I mean, it's just, it is fantastic. And are you ever planning on setting up a museum on your own?
I got rid of most of that stuff, but I would have an interest in World War One, especially relics, because they're not overly dear, and they're totally authentic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would have a lot of medals, of course, and some. I have some medals. I would have, World War One medals, and I would collect ones specifically to casualties, guys who were killed in the war. And I have a medal, a set of 3 medals, a death plaque, the death plaque holder, a photograph of the man, and his scroll that went with the death plaque. And that was to a fellow called James Dunnion. And he's in Ireland's Memorial Records, and he never set foot in Ireland. It was only because he was in the Tyneside Irish is he in Ireland's Memorial Records. There you go. Having said that, I have come across fellas in Ireland's Memorial Records that I couldn't get from any other source. You have to get all the databases together, you know.
Yeah. And you will continue. You will continue doing that. But I really do think that that it would be fantastic to have this museum that was there, that people could just walk in and see all of your work. I know you were on radio there recently, and that's where I heard you. And I thought, I've got to get on to him now and talk to him and the people working with you.
Great taste for one so young.
Pardon?
Great taste for one so young.
Well, I mean, I just said I really have to, and I don't know how I'm going to actually. So I started Googling you, and I found that you were actually in Tipperary. I'd missed the start of the show, so I didn't know where you were, and I thought, oh my God, he's in Tipperary, because I have a friend, I should say, my very good friend, Dr. Michael Casey, and he's from Templemore. So I said to him tonight, have you ever heard of Tom Burnell? And of course he had. His dad his family were, they've always been in Templemore. Barnan Castle, they owned Barnan Castle at one stage. And he writes a lot on his father's history. So Michael would be a historian as well. So I said to him, I'm going to be interviewing Tom now tonight. So I said, I can't talk to you for more than 2 minutes because I have to do some research, because I know very little about World War One. But long may you continue, Tom.
Sure, it's a labour of love. And the thing was, people would say to me, it must have been a very, very difficult job to do. It was a lovely job to do. inspiring. Every day you come across a mystery, and you have to solve the mystery. You have to find the clue that would lead to a newspaper article. And in order to do this, I said, right, well, what avenue have I not gone down? And the avenue was the death certificates.
Yeah.
So I went to all the death certificates from 1940 to 1921, looking for fellows who died after discharge so I could get them put into the Combat War Graves Commission. And I was halfway through it when the Combat War Graves Commission changed the criteria for inclusion to include all the civilians who were killed in the bombings in the North Stand in Dublin during World War II, and all the Irishmen who were killed on ships during World War I in the Merchant Navy that weren't on World War but were killed by submarines. That's 150 ships. So I had to go back and start again. Now, between 1940 and 1921, there are 6 million death certificates. And I did them twice. But it was brilliant.
Did you find yourself, do you see yourself as being a kind of a forensic scientist, if you like, somebody that's just delving in and, you know, sooner have one problem solved, or halfway through solving one problem, you find yourself being put in a completely different direction, one that you probably never thought you were going to be going in, or that you can compartmentalize that subject and say, oh, I'm after discovering this now, I'll go to that now next, and you put that over there until you're finished with this, and then it means that you're opening up a completely different, if you like, can of worms.
Well, that would come across when I'd be going through the newspapers. I come across a fella maybe in the Limerick Chronicle that was from Wexford, so I take that article and I put it in the Wexford box when I come to do Wexford, you know. But getting back to the death certificates, I was surprised the amount of, well, besides suicide, I was surprised the amount of people who died from rheumatism. They would coming out of the trenches. That really took their toll on them, you know, because they were out in the elements all the time, and you could see them being beaten down.
And would they be considered war dead? Would they be considered to have died in the battlefields, if you like, or would it be somebody that was having to be would they be categorized differently?
Not with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, because they would have to die from what they were discharged with. So if you were discharged with bronchitis and you died from TB, you weren't acceptable. But if you were discharged from TB and you died from TB and you got TB in service, you would. Peamount Sanatorium was huge in World War One. You know, the one outside in South Dublin.
Yeah.
It's very. No one really looks into that. Another thing was a lot of them died in mental homes, asylums as they were called at the time, and they died from.
A lot of them with post-traumatic stress that wouldn't have been diagnosed then. People who saw a lot of war and a lot of violence, and they just couldn't cope with what they had seen. Shell
shock was recognised. People say it wasn't recognised in World War One, but it was recognised. But a lot of the guys who died in the asylums, they died from general paralysis of the insane, and general paralysis of the insane is the final stages of syphilis.
Syphilis. Wow.
Now, syphilis, or if you could be cured of it, or if you got VD while you were on service, it usually took around 80 days to be cured. If you could be cured, it took about 80 days, and you didn't get paid for them.
Wow.
There you go. There's a different time.
Terrible, hard time. You know,
we ask questions.
You know, there's a spectacular, I think it was 2017, Sainsbury's did a Christmas ad, and I'm sure if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. It probably was their greatest. Sainsbury's are renowned for their Christmas ads, but this was
5 years ago.
It was 2017, I think, you had the British soldier on Christmas Eve, the British soldier, Christmas Day, standing up in the trenches, and walking over to the German soldier, and they put him down because there was always an armistice in on Christmas Day, and they went over and they hugged and they passed a cake, and he passed Sainsbury's chocolate to the German. They got a lot of complaints about it because they said people were saying, oh, they were making money out of the war. But I just thought it was a lovely thought that even on Christmas Day, people stopped fighting just long enough to celebrate Christmas universally and celebrate peace universally. And then they went back to the trenches and fought each other on whatever, Boxing Day or St. Stephen's Day, whichever. And it was just, it's a lovely ad. You should look at it. It's beautifully done.
So you know yourself, one of the nicest Christmas songs is I Wish I Was at Home for Christmas. Dubba dubba dum dum dubba dubba dum dum. You know that one? Christmas song about World War One. Fantastic.
Tommy Fleming sings a lovely one. Pardon?
I know the one you're talking about.
Christmas
night. This was a No Man's Land?
No, yeah, Christmas 1915 it's called. And it's just beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful and sad. But it's just, I think it's fantastic. But Tom Burnell or Burnell?
You know, my people come from Galway. In Galway, it's pronounced Burnell. And in Dublin, it's called Burnell. And Tipperary as well, Burnell.
Burnell. Yeah, there's probably Burnell because there's no E at the bottom of it, but it's probably of French origin. And it probably is because, you know, we're either Vikings or Spanish or whatever in this country.
I bought a book in a car boot sale one time, and it was the history of the Henley Regatta by Richard Burnell. And there was photographs of the team from way back 60 years ago. So I looked at the photograph, and right in the middle of it was my brother. I could see the family resemblance. So I wrote over to them. I said, the Burnells of Acton Burnell. I said, have you any connection to Galway? Because we've been in Galway for a couple of 100 years. And they said, no connection. But you can see it in the face, you know, you can see the family resemblance.
Isn't it amazing?
Wales and Shropshire.
Yeah, my grandmother was Welsh from Pontypridd in the Rhondda, and
big Irish connection there.
Welsh. It's I believe her background was Jewish on her mother's side. Jacob was the surname, and Jacob. I'm not sure if it was Jacob or Jacob, but and then the line became Protestant, and then it became I'm the only Catholic in the family. But you know, it's funny the way things happen and the things you unearth when you show some little bit of an interest, but it just gets you enough to say, oh, there's more.
You have the bug.
I have the bug. I'm nosy.
Very good.
Tom, thank you very much for being my guest on My Story, to tell your story.
Thanks for going easy on me.
You're very, very welcome, and best wishes with your snooping around and bringing the past to the future and to the present and the future.
Final word. Queen Nima said, we will remember them. We will remember,
and we must remember. Slán.